The pot had not been cool in 12 generations. That is not an exaggeration. It is the factual starting point of a story that begins in a village hidden in the mountains of the Noto Peninsula, where a single clay vessel sat over a hearth fire from the early Edo period until the dawn of the Showa era. It never went out. The coals beneath it were replaced before the last ember died. The pot never touched soap. It never met a scrub brush. And when the last keeper of that fire finally let it cool, the entire village gathered to watch it happen because they understood something we have forgotten. That something is the reason this pot refused to wash. Let me take you back to the beginning. The year is 1643. A potter named Yasuke shapes a wide-mouthed nabe from local clay, fires it in a wood-fueled kiln, and delivers it to a young bride named Chiyo. She's about to start her married life in a small farming community of 87 souls. The pot becomes her dowry. It is not ornament. It is the single most expensive object in her household, worth more than the rice harvest of an entire season. And on its first night, she does something that would make any modern kitchen safety inspector weep. She fills it with water and leftover vegetable scraps and places it directly on the embers. She lets it simmer for 3 hours. She does not wash it afterward. She wipes the rim with a cloth, stores it on the shelf, and the next morning she repeats the process. This is where it gets interesting. The lipid residue left behind from that first meal did something unexpected. The fats from the vegetables polymerized. They bonded to the porous surface of the clay at a molecular level. Each subsequent meal added another layer. The pot began to build its own memory, not as metaphor, but as chemistry. A chef in Kanazawa who inherited a similar 400-year-old nabe once told a researcher that his pot had a personality. He was not being poetic. He was being accurate. Here is the beautiful part. That polymerized layer, what we would call crust, and what the Japanese call kizushi, acts as a flavor capacitor. Every time new ingredients are added, the pot releases trace compounds from meals cooked a century earlier. The stew you taste tonight carries molecules from a wedding feast in 1712, a funeral meal in 1843, a harvest celebration in 1907. You are eating time. If that idea that you are tasting meals from centuries ago makes your kitchen feel a little more alive, then you understand why some pots deserve to hold their history. Stay with this channel if you want to keep uncovering these hidden layers in the objects we cook with. And in the comments, tell me, what is one flavor you wish you could taste from 100 years ago? But the pot held one more secret. After Chiyo died in 1698, her daughter took over the fire. She never asked if she should wash the pot. She was taught that the pot was alive. In the kizushi tradition, a nabe is not a tool. It is a co-cooker. It seasons itself. It learns. The crust is not grime. It is the archive of every meal it has ever hosted. And scrubbing that away would be like burning the village record books. And here we hit the problem that makes modern people uncomfortable. We have been trained to see biofilm as danger. We have been told that any surface touched by food must be sterilized. or we will fall ill. The grandmothers of the Noto Peninsula would have smiled at that fear, because they knew something the hygiene industry never wants you to understand. A properly seasoned clay pot is one of the most bacteriologically safe cooking vessels in existence. If this made sense instantly, it is because you already knew. Some people hear this and resist it. You are not that person. The science is straightforward. The polymerization process creates a surface that is hydrophobic at cooking temperatures. Bacteria cannot colonize it because there is no moisture layer for them to anchor onto. The constant heat of daily use keeps the interior above the growth zone for pathogens, and the sheer density of the seasoning layer acts as a physical barrier, sealing the porous clay beneath. A study of traditional earthenware pots from the Jomon period, some over 12,000 years old, found lipid residues that still contained identifiable fatty acid profiles. The pots had not been washed in millennia. They had simply been used and stored and used again. The bacteria that could have grown never did, because the pot was never allowed to cool completely. Stay with me here. This is where the story deepens. In the village where Chio's pot lived, the fire was passed from mother to daughter for 280 years. The pot survived earthquakes. It survived famines. It survived the modernization that swept Japan in the Meiji period. It survived because the village understood that the pot was not a luxury. It was a record keeper. When the rice harvest failed in 1734, the pot held a thin broth, and the village survived on what little flavor it could contribute. When a daughter married into a neighboring valley in 1812, the pot went with her for 3 months to bless the new household's hearth, then returned. By the time the last keeper died in 1937, the pot had hosted over 100,000 meals. The kizushi layer was so thick that the interior diameter had shrunk by nearly 2 centimeters. The pot had become a different object than the one Yasuke had shaped. The woman who inherited it, a great-granddaughter named Hanako, maintained the fire for another 39 years. She kept it burning through the war. She kept it burning through the American occupation. She kept it burning through the transition to electric rice cookers and gas stoves. She was the last person in the village to cook over an open hearth, and the neighbors thought she was eccentric. But the young people in the city had begun to rediscover the old ways. A documentary crew came to interview her in 1972. She showed them the pot.
The flavor is gentle.
She described its
with
taste.
The memories of a lifetime.
She described how it made her feel like she was cooking alongside women she had never met. The documentary became the basis for a culinary ethnography that is now required reading at the Kyoto Institute of Cuisine. And then Hanako fell ill. She knew she would not recover. She called her granddaughter, who lived in Tokyo and had never cooked a meal in a clay pot. She told her that the pot must be extinguished. The fire must be allowed to die. The village elders gathered, and on a spring morning in 1976, they surrounded the hearth while Hanako, weak but upright, fed the last log into the embers. The pot cooled over the course of 3 days. When it finally reached room temperature, Hanako lifted it with cloth-wrapped hands and placed it in a wooden box lined with silk. She sealed the box with a cord. She gave it to her granddaughter with a single instruction. When your first child is born, reopen this. Season it again with your own fire. The granddaughter kept the box for 23 years without opening it. She was afraid. She had been raised in a world where everything old was dirty, where anything unwashed was suspect. But when her daughter was born in 1999, she remembered the instruction. She built a fire in her Tokyo apartment, violating every building code. She unwrapped the pot. She filled it with water and vegetables and let it simmer for 3 hours. She said later that the steam smelled like a village she had never visited. The pot had been dormant for 2 decades. The kazushi layer had dried and cracked in places, but the first meal rehydrated it. The lipids rebonded. The pot woke up. It was not dead. It had been waiting. That granddaughter is alive today. She uses the pot every week. She has never washed it with soap. She wipes it with a damp cloth and stores it with a breath layer. She has built 10 meals into its season, which means her great-great-grandchildren will inherit a pot that still carries the taste of the bride who first seasoned it in 1643. Every time you scrub a pot to bare metal, you erase a lineage. You remove not just the residue, but the memory of every meal that pot has ever held. If you believe some pots deserve to keep their ghosts, share this video. Let others know that grime can be wisdom. And if you ever find a pot that has not met the soapy sponge in 300 years, do not reach for the steel wool. Listen closely instead. It may have a story worth tasting. There is a quiet rebellion in keeping a pot that refuses to be clean. It is a rebellion against the sanitized, the disposable, the world that tells us memory can be purchased and old things are to be replaced. The pot does not argue. It simply sits on the shelf, holding 280 years of flavor, waiting for the next hand that understands what it carries. The village on the Noto Peninsula no longer exists. The last houses were abandoned in the early 2000s, the young having moved to the cities, the old having passed. But the story of the pot does not end in an empty village. It lives in a Tokyo apartment where a woman in her 40s lifts a clay nabe from a wooden box every Sunday morning. She fills it with water and winter vegetables. She lights a flame, and the pot begins to breathe again, releasing molecules from a wedding in 1712, a harvest in 1907, a thin broth during a famine, a celebration after the war. It does not distinguish between sorrow and joy. It records both. It serves both. This is what the hygiene industry cannot sell you. They can sell you antibacterial sprays and stainless steel surfaces and the illusion that sterility is safety, but they cannot sell you a pot that remembers your grandmother's hands, because that pot does not need to be sold. It needs to be kept. The next time you reach for a scrub brush, pause. Ask yourself what you are about to erase. Not every surface must be stripped bare. Some layers are not grime. They're inheritance. And a pot that has not touched soap in 3 centuries does not need your cleaning. It needs your fire. It needs your fire. And here's the final detail most people miss. The pot does not just hold memory. It holds the cook who prepared each meal. The lipid residues are not neutral. They carry the microbiome of the hands that stirred the broth, the breath that blew on the coals, the tears that fell into the simmer. When the granddaughter tasted that first meal in 1999, she tasted Chio. She tasted her grandmother. She tasted women whose names she will never know. That moment, tasting the breath and tears of ancestors, is why the pot matters more than any modern appliance. Come back for the next chapter, where we will uncover another heirloom vessel that holds more than food. And leave me a word in the comments. What name would you whisper to a pot that remembered you? The act of keeping an unwashed pot is therefore an act of communion. It is a refusal to let the dead be forgotten. It is a declaration that the past is not a burden to scrub away, but a flavor to preserve. And in a world that demands we erase everything that came before, this pot stands as a quiet monument to the truth. We are not meant to be clean. We are meant to be layered.